What's going on, guys? We are back with another breakdown video, this time for UFC 301. This is the pay-per-view for the month of May. It's in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Pantoja versus Erceg, and I'm super excited for this card. Typically, I'm just excited because there's fights to watch on the weekend, but in terms of a pay-per-view, even though there isn't much like high name value on this card, it still has some sneaky matchups on it that are going to make for some great fights. Now, it's 2 in the morning right now, so if I make any mistakes, I start stumbling, I do apologize for that. It's also Orthodox Easter this weekend, so I've been super busy. That's why I haven't been able to release this video. But regardless, I'm going to catch up, start releasing these breakdown videos earlier on in the week. But without further ado, let's just get into this card and start breaking it down. Make sure to like and subscribe on the channel, obviously, to have to get access to more of my UFC content, and drop a comment on the videos. I want to hear your guys' perspective on specific matchups. If you agree or disagree, regardless, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Now, kicking off the card, we have Alessandro Costa going up against Kevin Borjas. Now, this fight is going to be awesome. We got Costa on the one side, a physically imposing, explosive flyweight. He's going to throw with 100% intent every time he strikes. He will mix in wrestling throughout his fights, but he seems to strike for the majority of them. Now, the way he lunges in, he goes in with powerful hooks to close the distance and try to land big on his opponents. Now, he also has solid wrestling defense. He defends takedowns and trips well. So whether the opponent is shooting for those double or single legs, or they're clinching up and trying to trip him, he does have solid defense in that regard. He does seem to fade, though. We've seen this in his recent UFC fights. He's had a kind of a weird UFC tenure so far. He's had 3 fights in the UFC, and he's 1-2. In his debut, he went up against Amir Albazi on short notice. Now, Amir Albazi is a tough fight for anybody in the flyweight division, never mind for a newcomer making his UFC debut. Now, he did keep it pretty competitive in that first round. It was a lot of back and forth. He defended takedowns well, but in that second round, he got clipped and dropped by Albazi, and then later on in that third round, he was TKO'd by Albazi there. There's no shame in that. Took it on short notice. Albazi's a killer in this flyweight division. Now, but he did fade in that third. He did fade throughout that fight as well. Now, a lot of that could be towards the whole short notice thing, but then he goes up against Jimmy Flick. Jimmy Flick, not a striker by any means. He's going to want to grapple, and Alessandro Costa's stocky, build for the flyweight division proves to be a little bit tougher for those specific fighters like Jimmy Flick. He ended up getting him out of there in that second round, but more recently he went up against Steve Erceg, who's going to be fighting for the title, and we'll get into that a little later, but it was the same idea. He had a nice early fight with Steve Erceg. I believe he actually got dropped by Erceg in that fight as well, which brings me to my another point I was going to mention later. He is kind of chinny for the flyweight division. He was hurt in that Albazi fight. He was hurt in the Steve Erceg fight. Although he did bounce back sort of against Steve Erceg, he ended up, I believe, he at least stunned Erceg with a couple big shots, I believe, in the second round. I don't think he dropped him, but he did land heavily there, wobbling Erceg in that fight. But in that third round, you can tell he slowed down. Erceg was able to control him up against the cage for the majority of the third, and he ended up losing that fight to Erceg. Now, you go and look at Kevin Borjas on the other side, and this guy is a technical striker with a nice in-and-out style. He actually has decent power for the flyweight division as well. He's got very precise striking also. We saw that on his Contender Series fight against Victor Diaz and in his UFC debut to Joshua Van. Now, he does mix in body strikes very well to soften up his opponents, what I actually really like to see, because it keeps the opponent thinking. Are you going to drop down low for a body shot? Or are you going to go up top? I love it when strikers mix those body shots, which Borjas does well. Now, he does get taken down. We've seen it in his fights, but he's able to stay safe on the ground and work his way back up to his feet. In that Victor Diaz fight, similar to Alessandro Costa in the terms of being a strong, muscular flyweight, Diaz found success taking Borjas down, but Borjas never faded. He never gave up in that fight. He worked his way to his feet slowly, safely, so he doesn't get caught in any submissions. And he pieced up Diaz on the feet there. Fantastic performance by Borjas on the Contender Series to earn his contract. Now, the one thing I do like about Borjas as well is he has that killer instinct. If he hurts his opponents, he will go in and try to finish the fight. The only problem with that is we've seen it, he goes in to try to finish the fight with his chin up in the air. He gets tagged heavily in those sequences as well, so it is a cause for concern against a heavy-handed fighter such as Alessandro Costa. I am going to pick Borjas here. He is the underdog in this matchup, but I actually really like him to beat Costa this weekend. Reason being is Costa, when he goes in with those lunging, looping strikes to close the distance and try to land heavily, he is susceptible to getting hit down the middle and kind of like shaking him up and doesn't know where to go after, whether he should continue the sequence or kind of step back. And Borjas has a nice sharp jab, and we've seen in that fight with Joshua Van, we saw him apply that jab when he was lunging in and kind of slow the opponent down. I think that jab is going to be super effective for him. Now, in that Joshua Van fight for Borjas, he was out-pressured. The volume was just too much for him. He had a success early. He actually dropped Van in that first round and almost got the finish. But Van bounced back greatly throughout the second and third rounds, applied that pressure, high volume. But Costa is not that kind of a fighter. He is typically low volume. Van, Borjas' previous opponent, had 120 significant strikes against Zhumagulov, 156 against Borjas, and 83 against Felipe Bunes, who he only fought for 2 rounds. Costa, 45 over 3 rounds on the Contender Series, 17 versus Albazi, 65 against Flick, who ended up finishing, of course, in that second round, but Flick is not a striker, and he landed 54 against Erceg over 3 rounds. So that volume, that pressure, it's not Costa's style. I don't think he's going to wrestle as much as everybody thinks he's going to. Give me Kevin Borjas for the win. Next up, we have Ismael Bonfim going up against Vinc Pichel, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. We know what the UFC is trying to do here. Bonfim coming off of that Benoit Saint Denis loss. A lot of people are ready to write him off. I'm not going to kind of throw him overboard at this point in his career. He's only 28. We saw how well that Benoit Saint Denis loss aged for him. I think this is a great bounce back spot. Vinc Pichel, 41 years old at this point. He's been 2 years removed from the sport. Not because of a lack of trying to get matchups. He's actually had 3 cancellations prior to this fight here. But it's just hard to side with Pichel at this point of his career. I think the UFC is trying to get a bounce back fight for Ismael Bonfim. In Brazil, I think they want to set him up to get an emphatic win on home turf and kind of get him back in that W column. There's nothing much left to say in this point. Ismael Bonfim is a great overall fighter. He's dangerous. I just don't have much faith in a Vinc Pichel that's 41 years old that hasn't fought in 2 years. Obviously, he can come in here and shock us all, because I'm sure 99.9% of us have Ismael Bonfim to defeat Pichel, but I really don't see that happening. I'm not going to spend any more time breaking down this fight. Bonfim for the win. He probably ends up getting a KO or a TKO at some point in this fight. Next up, we have a women's flyweight bout. Dione Barbosa going up against Ernesta Karackaite. Now, these two are both making their debuts, both of them coming off of a win from the Dana White's Contender Series. On the Dione Barbosa side, she got a first-round submission on the Contender Series, and that seems to be her game plan in her fights. She is a grappler. She has a black belt in both judo and jiu-jitsu, and has a Brazilian national and international judo titles. She is definitely a grappler. As we mentioned, it shows in her fights. That's her bread and butter. Now, she is competent enough on the feet. We saw that on her Contender Series fight. She moves well. She kind of has like this, she has a nice bounce in her step as well. But like I said, she does want to get the fight to the ground, and she wants to show off her submission and grappling skills. Despite only having 8 pro MMA fights, she's fought 2 current UFC fighters outside of the promotion. One of them being Josiane Nunes, which she ended up losing in that fight, but I believe she was able to take her down, and that's a big feat because Josiane Nunes is kind of like a stocky, strong woman for this women's flyweight division. So despite the loss, she was able to find success in that fight, and more intriguingly, she defeated Karine Silva outside of the UFC. That is super impressive because that is Karine Silva's most recent loss. That was back in, I don't know exactly when it was. Let me double check right here. I have the stuff open. That was back in 2019. So since May of 2019, Karine Silva has not lost a fight. Her most recent loss was to this shadow figure here because the UFC doesn't have a full PNG model of Dione Barbosa yet. But I hold that win in high regard considering where Karine Silva is in her career. Now on the other side, we have Ernesta Karackaite, a kickboxing style. She's actually a two-time Lithuanian kickboxing champion. She's a high volume striker. She actually had one of the best fights on the Contender Series that I've seen. High pace, high volume against, I think her name was Carly Judice, I believe. I'm not 100% sure. But that fight was really fun to watch. High volume. These ladies were throwing for 15 minutes straight. Now, despite having that high volume striking style, there's not much technique behind it. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful when I say that, but she comes in throwing high volume, but doesn't really worry about anything being thrown back at her. Her head doesn't move off the center line very much. She's extremely hittable in those sequences. But yeah, she's all gas, no breaks. I'm expecting her to be the exact same here in this fight. Now, from what I've seen from these two ladies, I believe that Dione Barbosa will be competent enough to keep this competitive on the feet. But if this fight hits the ground, which I'm pretty sure it will, I think Barbosa will land those takedowns. This fight will be kind of back and forth on the feet, but if it gets to the ground, Dione Barbosa will be miles ahead in the grappling and wrestling department. I don't think Ernesta is going to have an answer for her on the mat, and I can see Barbosa eventually wrapping up a submission. So that's gonna be my prediction for this fight. Dione Barbosa submission against Ernesta in Brazil. Next up, we have an absolute banger. This is going to be awesome. Somebody is getting KO'd in this fight, and I believe it's going to be Mullarkey. We have Mauricio. It's actually Mauricio Ruffy. I've heard Caio Borjas in the corner of Ruffy yelling his name, and despite the R, I'm pretty sure I believe Brazilian or Portuguese, whatever, the R's for us is actually an H. It's a H sound. Regardless, it's Mauricio Ruffy going up against Jamie Mullarkey. Now, I kind of gave it away, but Ruffy trains down at Fighting Nerds with Caio Borjas and all of those guys down there. And we will talk about him later on this card. But he is mainly a striker. He's got that wide karate style stance. He has fantastic kickboxing, and he has he uses his quick reflexes as opposed to like a high guard. He has fantastic reactionary movement. He can slip punches well. He backs up and dodges kicks well. He has very good vision in that sense on the feet, and he's powerful and precise. He mixes in strikes at all three levels, which I absolutely love when I'm watching a striker do their thing in the octagon. Now, he is mainly a counter striker, though, so he can be low volume at times, but going up against somebody like Mullarkey, that's still going to leave him with plenty of opportunity to land strikes because Mullarkey is more high volume and in your face kind of. He's definitely going to push the pace in this fight, but that's just going to leave a ton of openings for Ruffy to land and probably KO Mullarkey. Mullarkey's a decent overall fighter. He's competent in all areas of MMA. He also has the experience advantage. With 24 career fights, 10 of those being in the UFC. Now, he will strike for the majority of his fights, but he will mix in. He's not opposed to mixing in some takedowns. He has power. He has 10 career KO victories and has good volume. He is constantly moving and cutting off and cutting angles around the octagon. I am going to go with Ruffy here, as I already mentioned. Mullarkey's volume, like we mentioned, will leave openings for Ruffy. You cannot trust Mullarkey's chin at this point in his career. He has 5 KO losses, and 2 of those coming in his last 3 fights. He got KO'd by Hakparast brutally in his most recent fight, which you can't really get KO'd by Hakparast and still think that you have a chin. If Ruffy lands anything cleanly on Mullarkey in this fight, I think Jamie's going to sleep. And I'm not going to go much more in depth with this breakdown. Jesus, that was difficult to get out. Ruffy for the KO win. Let's move on. All right, another lightweight bout. We got Joaquim Silva going up against Drakkar Klose. Now these two are UFC vets at this point. Joaquim Silva 35, Drakkar Klose 36, which is surprising to me because I always thought Joaquim Silva was older. But to my surprise, Drakkar Klose is actually the older fighter in this matchup. Now, as you guys can see, Joaquim Silva, absolute physical specimen. Look at the guy, just chiseled. Anyway, he has some decent power on the feet. He has 7 career KOs, I believe. He's kind of an anomaly, though, because when I was watching back his fights, he has decent movement and footwork that helps him defensively on the feet, but he is hittable. It's so weird to see. He gets tagged at times in his fights, but he has good movement for the most part. I did notice a few things in watching back his fights. I think one of them is what I just mentioned, his style kind of being an anomaly in the sense that he has good movement and defense, but he's still hittable. Regardless, number one, he relies on his power a little too much. He's extremely patient in his fights, and even though he seems to be down in some of the rounds, he kind of relies on that one big punch, kick, knee, whatever it is, to kind of sway the round into his favor or look for that finishing blow. So that is a cause for concern, especially going up against a fighter like Drakkar Klose, who is going to be in your face with good pressure and good volume. Now, number two, he doesn't typically make adjustments. He knows what he wants to do in those fights, and he will continue doing them until, even if they're unsuccessful. One spot in particular that I noticed this, Joaquim Silva actually got knocked out by Hakparast as well. We just talked about Mullarkey getting knocked out by Hakparast. But in that Hakparast fight, there was multiple times where Joaquim Silva would throw a body kick, it would land, but Hakparast would catch it and then go over the top with the opposite hand and land significantly on Silva doing that. And Silva kept doing it. He didn't make any adjustments. He didn't maybe switch sides. He didn't go for, I don't know what it was. He continued doing it and continued failing at it. There was a few more instances in that sense that I noticed in his fights, but that one specifically stood out to me. Now, on the Drakkar Klose side, he's a generalist. He likes to throw, and he eventually will work his opponent to the fence and try to get the fight to the ground. He does a great job actually pushing, forcing his opponents to that fence, clinching up and tripping them down to the floor. I noticed that he likes to try to work towards the back, and then he does he kicks the back of the opponent's foot, gets them up, and then drags them, he gets them to lean back after kicking that back foot, and he kind of drags them in that direction, which is actually kind of smart. I mean, he gets the opponent to give him the momentum and then kind of falls with it. So that's a great tactic of takedowns that I noticed on the Drakkar Klose side. He does typically keep a high pace, which we mentioned a little bit earlier, and he has tons of pressure, but he is super reckless on the feet. We've seen it in a bunch of his fights where he does not care to get hit, to take a shot, to give a shot. In multiple of his fights, and for the most part, his chin has held up. He only has 2 losses on his record, one of those being a KO loss to Beneil Dariush. And that's what happened. He actually hurt Beneil Dariush a great deal in that fight and almost had him out of there. But like I said, he's really reckless in those striking exchanges. He goes in, and then Beneil Dariush was able to ended up flipping the tables and finishing Drakkar Klose. So that is one thing that I'm very concerned of in this fight. He's also a fan of dirty boxing. He likes to wrap up that single collar tie, throw heavy uppercuts and hooks, and land on his opponents. He's found success more recently in that Rafa Garcia fight against Brandon Jenkins. He loves doing damage in that dirty boxing single collar tie clinch. And he's going to probably find success there, but I don't know if he'll be able to clinch up Silva. He has great lateral movement. I think, anyway, regardless, this is actually a very tough decision for me. A lot of people are on the Drakkar Klose side because in terms of overall MMA ability, I think Drakkar Klose has Joaquim Silva beat. But I don't know if I can go with Klose here. Reason why, we mentioned that recklessness. He is so reckless going into the pocket to exchange with his opponents, and he's extremely hittable. And at 36 years old, how long is this style going to work for him? How long is his chin going to hold up in his career? Now, Joaquim Silva on the opposite side has been KO'd 3 times in his career, so I'm not saying this guy has a chin made of granite, but how long is Drakkar Klose going to be able to effectively push the pace, take a shot to give his own? And Silva's got decent power. I think he's going to be able to land heavily on Drakkar Klose due to his hitability, due to that recklessness. So I am going to go with Joaquim Silva. I'm going against the grain with this pick here. It might be surprising to a lot of people, but regardless, that's who I'm going with in this fight. Let's move on. We got a featherweight fight next up. We got Gian Silva. I've heard a lot of people call him Gian Silva. Regardless, we got Gian Silva going up against William Gomis in the featherweight division. Now, Gian Silva is another Fighting Nerds fighter. He trains with Ruffy and Bahayo in the down at Fighting Nerds, and I have loved what this camp has been able to do for their fighters and the success that they've had recently. Now, Silva's gonna have that similar style to Ruffy. He's got that wide karate style stance. He moves around the octagon more than Ruffy does. He moves laterally. He keeps his distance and kind of gauges where he can find his shots and where he can land them. Now he's explosive as well, and although he can be low volume, he finishes rounds off strong, which I like. The judges tend to have recency bias. It's a 5-minute round. It's not too long, but the thing that's going to stick in their mind is those last sequences in that last minute, that last 30 seconds. And Gian Silva has shown that he kind of puts a stamp on those rounds by moving forward more, landing heavy strikes, and trying to go for it in those last moments of each round, which I really like. He's very calm and collected in his fights. I don't know if you guys have seen him fight before, but the guy is so calm. He's so collected when he's fighting. He also likes to play mind games with his opponents. He has various antics. He barks. I think he had like the slowest walkout ever in the UFC. I think that was him, if I remember correctly, but he like points at his opponent during the fight. He'll like slap his body if his opponent lands there. He'll wave them on in the fight. So he has a multitude of antics that he likes to do and kind of messes with his opponent. Now on the other side, we have William Gomis. He has that French savant style, and shout out to Angelo from We Want Picks because he's the only reason why I know that that's what it's called. It's kind of that low volume, rangy, methodical striking. Him specifically, he has a kick heavy style. He likes to throw those low kicks, those body kicks, which he does effectively. He doesn't really force anything on the feet either. He's fantastic at finding his shots. He's quick, he's precise, and very elusive on the feet. We've seen him mix in his wrestling as well. He does a great job of controlling his opponents in the clinch and on the ground as well, despite his kickboxing style. Now, he has a solid chin as well. I watched him get tagged with heavy shots in his UFC fights against Jarno Aarons, against Francis Marshall, and he ate that with no issues. Now, a lot of people are going with Gomis on the Gomis side for this fight because of his striking and his ability to stay safe, but I'm not sold on him just yet. He's 3-0 in the UFC, yes, but he's going up against Jarno Aarons, who he should beat if he's this fantastic fighter that everybody claims he is, but he got a majority decision win. He got a split decision against Francis Marshall, which at this point does not sit very well with me, because considering Dulgarian absolutely wiped the floor with Marshall. More recently, he had that finish against Gamori Good on him for that one. In my opinion, Silva beats all of those fighters unanimously and possibly finishes them. So I know I say this, but then Silva hasn't really fought anybody either. He hasn't fought the same level of competition, so I can't hate on the Gomis side for actually successfully beating these people, and then Gian Silva not fighting people at that level. He came off the Contender Series and defeated a Kevin Vallejos, a young Argentinian fighter that has a lot of potential, and we will most definitely see him in the UFC in the future. But he destroyed him over 3 rounds. That was fantastic. I actually I was on the Vallejo side, and I was very impressed with Gian's performance in that fight. And then in his UFC debut, he ended up knocking out Weston Wilson, I believe, which Weston Wilson is not UFC caliber. I'm not holding that win in high regard at all, but I think Gian Silva makes a statement here. I think he will defeat Gomis in Brazil. A lot of people are on the Gomis side. I really like Gian Silva. I think he's going to be a little tricky for Gomis. I think he's going to be able to land those shots, kind of push the pace on him. I don't know. We'll see, but I really like the Gian Silva side here. Let's move on. Now, before I break this down, you guys are going to think that I'm mainly going with Brazilians on this card. And I'm pretty sure there's a Brazilian in each matchup on this 14-fight card. But I am going to pick against them eventually. But right now, I am going to go with Elves Brener. A lot of people are going with Oralbai, and I don't blame them. He's a wrestle-heavy style, and he's got power on the feet as well. Oralbai wants to crash in, close the distance, and get those takedowns. He has a chain wrestling style similar to Merab Dvalishvili. He does struggle with control, though, also like Merab Dvalishvili. We've seen him control a little bit on the mat, but typically his opponents are able to work their way back up to their feet, but not before eating some ground and pound strikes from Oralbai and maybe having to defend a few submission attempts as well. He also, one thing I noticed as well, he feints takedowns very well. He'll like bob up and down while he's fighting to keep the possibility of a takedown in the mind of his opponent, so that they kind of have a little bit of hesitancy due to he's always like bobbing his head down and like feinting those takedowns. He does that very well, and I've noticed it in his fights, and typically he does them well. One thing to note for this fight, it is a lightweight matchup, he hasn't been down at lightweight since August of 2021, so almost 3 years. He has been fighting in that welterweight division, but this isn't going to be a new weight class for him. He does have lightweight fights in his career. Now on the other side, we got Elves Brener. I'm not sure. I'm going to call him Elvis. He's a typical shoot-a-box fighter. He's aggressive on the feet, incredible jiu-jitsu, and he is tough as hell. That toughness showed in that Guram Kutataladze fight. This guy's hair was blonde at the beginning of the fight. He got cut open right on the hairline, and his hair was red from all the blood, and this guy still came back after getting absolutely destroyed in that second round. Blood everywhere. He came back and finished Guram as a plus 500 underdog in the third round of that fight. This guy is not going anywhere. He has 3 losses. He's never been finished. He's not going anywhere. He will grind out these fights. He won't let being down deter him. He will move forward, land heavy, and just do his thing. I kind of like veered off of my notes here. He attacks well with his legs. He has strong leg kicks, and he has nice knees up the middle that I think will land when Oralbai throws his takedowns or shoots his takedowns. I know, like I mentioned, Oralbai does do that thing where he like feints a lot, so it's going to be hard for Brener to time him, but I think he will land a knee up the middle when Oralbai goes in for a takedown. A big thing I like about Brener is he has a sense of urgency. If he's down in the fight, he's going to still keep the pressure. If he notices his opponent's starting to fade, he will push the pace, and I just love that in a fighter. He's also 3-0 in the UFC. He has 2 KOs under his belt, and 2 of those coming in his most recent fights. Now, in his debut, there was like a questionable win against Tukagov. I thought he won that fight, but that was a close fight against a tough fighter in Tukagov. for his UFC debut, so solid win there. Then he came in, finished Guram Kutataladze on short notice. No, sorry, Guram was on short notice, I believe. Regardless, he ended up finishing him in the third round in emphatic fashion, and then he went up against Krzyzewski, a fellow Brazilian, and knocked him out in 4 minutes. That was at catchweight of 165, though. It wasn't really down at that lightweight division, but nevertheless, a solid KO victory for him in his last fight. Now, I have been back and forth on this. You guys already know that I'm going with Elves Brener, but I really wanted to take Oralbai because of that chain wrestling and the fact that I've seen him absolutely ragdoll people in his fights. But I think Brener is going to be the toughest fight that Oralbai's had in his career. I know Oralbai's coming off of a dominant win against Medic, but there's an argument to be made that Brener is the better overall mixed martial artist. Maybe not on the feet, but in terms of like wrestling and jiu-jitsu, I think Brener is going to be the toughest matchup Oralbai has had so far. And I think he might get discouraged when he throws everything he can at Brener and Brener just isn't going anywhere. I think Brener has fantastic jiu-jitsu to keep him safe and threaten submissions when Oralbai gets those takedowns. And the guy's just tough as hell. He's going to have success on the feet. We're just going to have to see how well Oralbai does in the wrestling and control on the ground, if he can stay safe from those submission attempts from Brener. But I will side with the huge underdog in Elves Brener to take a win in his home country of Brazil. Next up, we have a strawweight division fight. Strawweight fight. Like I said, guys, it is 2 in the morning. We're like half an hour into this video, so it's like 2:30. Let's keep trucking. All right, we got Karolina Kowalkiewicz going up against Iasmin Lucindo, and I'm not going to spend too much time here. There's not much to kind of discuss in this matchup. Karolina's on a career resurgence. She is on a 4-fight win streak at the age of 38. We thought she was done, but she had a little bit left in the tank. That 4-fight win streak was against low-level competition, though. Felice Herrig, she ended up submitting. And then she beat, I had these written down, Silvana Gomez Suarez. She defeated Vanessa Demopoulos and Diana Belbita more recently. Now, I think Lucindo also beats all of these people, probably in a better fashion than Kowalkiewicz did. Now, there's a few things pointing me in the direction of Lucindo. She's 22 years old to Kowalkiewicz's 38, so she's 16 years younger. And Lucindo actually has finishing ability. Kowalkiewicz has 16 wins and only 4 career finishes. Lucindo has 15 career wins and 11 finishes. She doesn't typically allow her fights to get decided by the judges. Kowalkiewicz kind of does, whether she doesn't have that finishing ability or whatever it is. Lucindo's in there to finish the fight and get a win. Kowalkiewicz kind of like is just kind of point fighting, trying to get the judges to side with her. I'm kind of blabbering. I said I wasn't going to spend too much time here. I don't think Kowalkiewicz is going to be fast enough. Her age is going to show in this fight. Lucindo is the younger, the quicker, probably the stronger fighter in this matchup that actually has finishing ability. I think Karolina's resurgence is over this Saturday, and she might actually retire after getting finished by Lucindo. So give me a Lucindo by finish, probably by a TKO, I would say. But we're moving on. All right, a featherweight matchup. This one is going to be absolutely awesome to watch. We got Jack Shore on one side and the savage Joanderson Brito on the other side. Now, like I mentioned, Brito, absolute savage. The guy enters the octagon looking for one thing and one thing only, and that is to finish his opponents. He's strong. He throws heat. He has a solid calf kick. He also is a BJJ brown belt, and we've seen him utilize his grappling in the UFC very effectively. One thing I did notice about him specifically, though, is that he struggles with a jab. He struggles with his opponent's jabs down the middle. I don't know if it's a lack of head movement or what it is, but people have been able to land this bad boy on Brito in the UFC. Now, on the Jack Shore side, he's a great overall fighter. He has decent technique on the feet with a great 1-2 and a jab, which he's going to find success with in this matchup against Brito. But his biggest strength is his wrestling. He has great hips and he defends takedowns very well. He has a very fundamental and methodical approach to his fights, which is the complete opposite to Brito. Shore also does a great job staying safe regardless of where the fight takes place. He has good movement on the feet, good footwork, and he doesn't really force much on the feet. He tries to pick his shots well, and in terms of getting takedowns, he waits for his opponent to give him openings. He doesn't necessarily like chase those double legs, chase those single legs. He kind of waits for his opponent to swing, leave an opening, and ducks under, gets those takedowns. And yeah, and if he ends up on bottom, he stays safe enough and works back to his feet. Now, I actually am having trouble convincing myself that Jack Shore is my pick, but he is going to be my pick. I don't know if I'm sold completely on Joanderson. Brito right now, he's on a 4-fight finish streak, I believe. But I'm not too impressed with those wins. Like, I hate to be that guy, but it's like, he goes on the Contender Series against Diego Lopez. He kicked the absolute shit out of Lopez in that fight. I will give him that. And that win aged very well considering how good Diego Lopez is right now. We just saw him starch Sadiq Youssef at UFC 300. Regardless, this isn't a breakdown about Lopez. So we're talking about Brito. Absolutely starched him. One thing that I noticed, that was the whole jab thing. Diego Lopez's jab was money in that fight. Regardless, he kicked the shit out of Lopez on that Contender Series fight, which ended early because of an eye poke. Regardless, we're moving on to his UFC debut against Bill Algeo. He struggled with the volume and the ranginess of Bill Algeo. That's another person that effectively applied his jab to Brito's face. One thing I will say, though, is Algeo is kind of a tricky matchup for a lot of people because of that. He's got that hands low, moves around a lot. He's high volume, in your face. And he wasn't able to effectively take him down, which Brito typically does to find success in his fights. Now, his next fight was... I'm just going to pull this up. I have everything here. I don't know why I'm stressing myself out at 2:30 in the morning to remember all this stuff. All right. After that, he starched Andre Fili in 41 seconds. Fantastic win to have under your belt, but Fili is kind of chinny. Not taken away, that's a solid win to have after losing to Bill Algeo in your debut. Next up, Lucas Alexander. He was able to submit him in 2 minutes in the first round. He was able to climb the back of Lucas Alexander, soften him up, wrap up a choke. I'm pretty sure Lucas Alexander took that on short notice. But he's like 1-2 in the UFC, so he hasn't really panned out to be anything that special. He got his fight after that. He ground and pounded Weston Wilson. Weston Wilson had like a knee bar locked up, and Brito's like, none of that. Hammer fisted him into oblivion. But if we're not going to praise Gian Silva earlier for a Weston Wilson knockout, like I said, I'm not holding that in high regard either. And his most impressive win, other than that Fili knockout, is probably the ninja choke he got on Jonathan Pierce. But now here's another thing that's kind of like sticking out to me. Jonathan Pierce, David Onama was able to reverse positions on this guy and keep up with him in the wrestling. So considering Jonathan Pierce controlled Brito for ended in 4 minutes for 9 minutes of that fight before Brito kind of had that Hail Mary ninja choke to defeat Pierce, that didn't really age very well in my opinion. And I think Jack Shore is actually a better wrestler than Jonathan Pierce is. Now, if you're going back to the Jack Shore side, this guy was 16-0 at one time. That doesn't happen by accident. A lot of people are writing him off because of that Ricky Simon loss. And considering Ricky Simon hasn't won since then, he lost to Song Yadong, he lost to Mario Batista. But is that a indication of the lack of skill on the Ricky Simon side, or is that an indication of how good Song Yadong and Mario Batista have become? Regardless, he did mention in that fight, I think it might have been afterwards, but those weight cuts down to bantamweight were absolutely killing him. And we know when there's tough weight cuts, your chin does get a little more compromised, and that could have been the reason why he got chinned in that fight and then eventually finished. Not making excuses, that's a solid win That is a solid opponent to lose to, though. And then he comes back, goes up a weight class to the featherweight division, and ends up choking out Makwan Americani in his last fight, which actually was over a year ago. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind if you are on the Jack Shore side. I know a lot of people are on Brito, but I think Jack Shore is going to find success with that jab, with that 1-2 down the middle that Joanderson Brito does struggle with. Jack Shore has also won every single fight in the UFC that he's managed to take his opponents down in. The only fight that he did not win was the Ricky Simon fight, which he did not land a takedown in. I think he's going to be able to find the takedowns on Brito. I think he's going to be able to land that 1-2, that jab on the feet that Brito struggles with so much. And there was one thing I wanted to talk about. The Timur Aliyev fight is similar to the Brito, and a lot of people might kind of be like, dude, you don't know what you're talking about, but I kind of do. Timur Aliyev has that same kind of build as Brito. He's got that stocky, muscular build for featherweight. He's strong. He throws wild on the feet, those wild power strikes on the feet like Brito does, and he also likes to wrestle. Jack Shore found a lot of success in that fight. It was a lot of back and forth. There was takedowns being landed on each side, but Jack Shore found his mark and knocked down Valiev, I believe, twice in that fight. So that's kind of like a good a good matchup comparison in my opinion, because those two fighters are quite similar. I'm going against the grain on this one. I'm picking against Brazil in this matchup. I'm still not convinced on the Brito side. If he gets this win on Jack Shore, I will finally admit that he is the real deal. I just haven't been completely impressed with that 4-fight win streak, or that 4-fight finish streak on the Brito side. I've kind of overextended my welcome here at this fight, but I'm going with Jack Shore to defeat Brito in Brazil. Next up, so the main card I'm going to kind of fly through because there's a lot of heavy favorites and there's really not much to say. In this specific matchup, we have Paul Craig and Caio Bahaio. I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's so tough. I'm going to learn a little bit more this weekend when I hear the commentators talk about his name, pronounce his name, whatever. All right, we got Paul Craig on one side, the Bear Jew. We already know what this guy wants to do. He wants to grapple. He's got some of the slickest grappling and jiu-jitsu that we have available in the UFC. And he's tough as hell. He's recently moved down to middleweight. We saw him move down and defeat Muniz by TKO, I believe, in his debut in the weight class. And then more recently, he was absolutely demolished by Brendan Allen. And then we got Caio Bahaio on the other side. This guy, down at Fighting Nerds, he's like the Fighting Nerds leader. He kind of put them on the map, I feel like. But he's got that nice wide karate style on the feet. He's going to be miles ahead of Paul Craig on the feet. He's going to be able to land those shots. Despite Paul Craig's toughness, I think Bahaio is going to land heavy. I think he's going to rock Paul Craig and eventually TKO him. If I'm Bahaio, I just avoid the ground altogether. I know Caio is a fantastic wrestler and grappler in his own right, but he's just going to be miles ahead on the feet. There's no reason to entertain the grappling exchanges against somebody with the jiu-jitsu ability of Paul Craig. I think Bahaio is going to be able to TKO him. Let's move on. Next up, we got Michel Pereira going up against Ihor Potieria, who is taking this fight on short notice. Pereira was originally scheduled to fight Mahmoud Muradov, who had to pull out for some reason. So in comes Ihor. It seems like this is Ihor's thing. He comes in on short notice. He did it in his last fight, that impressive victory over Robert Bryczek, a Polish powerhouse that was supposed to be this absolute killer. And Ihor came in, bam, bam, just pieced him up on the feet. And that actually, Ihor's got underrated striking. I think he's actually a very good kickboxer. A lot of people like to give him flack because he gets finished, because his cardio is absolutely ass cheeks. But Michel Pereira, he has recently found his new weight class. This guy was killing himself getting down to welterweight. The guy is an absolutely huge middleweight, never mind welterweight. Regardless, he doesn't have to cut as much weight now. He's looking fantastic in that middleweight division. He has 2 first-round finishes in the weight class, I believe, since his move down there. I'm going to verify this while we're here. He TKO'd Michal Oleksichuk in his most recent fight, he landed a huge body shot, I believe. And before that, in his debut in the middleweight division, he absolutely starched Andre Petroski. I don't really hold that in high regard. This guy, Petroski, knocked himself out off of the hip of Jacob Malkoun. Never seen anything like that. Ridiculous. So I don't really hold that in high regard, but Michel Pereira's got that fun kind of capoeira Brazilian fighting style, where a lot of flips, a lot of spins. He's kind of toned that down since moving up to middleweight. I don't think he wants to gas himself out, but he's there to create a show for the audience, entertain them. But I think he's realizing he can do that by absolutely just starching his opponents, and I think he does that against Ihor here. Ihor does very well for the first 3-4 minutes of the fight. He has sharp kickboxing technique, but he just fades, man. We've seen it in all of his fights. Ihor's 2-3 in the UFC. He has a win over Shogun Rua, who was 41 or something at the time. He also has that impressive win against that Robert Berschek fellow in their last fight. So I'm not taking anything away from his most recent win, but the shell of himself, Shogun Rua, is not anything to be anything too impressive. But in the 3 fights that he has lost, it's all been KO finishes. In the Negamarianu fight, he did well early, faded, got TKO'd. Oberg, that fight didn't last long enough for him to fade. He got knocked out in 2 minutes. And then in the Rodolfo Bellato fight, I don't know how he lost that fight. He had Rodolfo out of there in that first round. Tried to KO him. Thank God for that ref for Bellato, because a lot of refs would have probably stopped that fight. But he ended up gassing, and Bellato came back and finished him in the second round. And that just seems to be the story of Ihor's career. I think Pereira KOs him in this matchup. Let's move on. Oh, another thing to note, actually, Ihor fights at light heavyweight. He's going down to middleweight for this fight. He went down to middleweight in the Brishek fight as well, which he ended up missing. But that's a neat thing to note for this fight. Give me Michel Pereira by KO, TKO. Let's move on. Another fight that I'm not going to spend too much time on. Anthony Smith, Lionheart, going up against Vitor Petrino. I've been very high on Petrino since watching him fight Bellato on the Contender Series. I've picked him in all of his fights so far in the UFC as well, and he hasn't let me down so far. Now, he hasn't really fought the best competition. He's fought Modestas Bukauskas, which he ended up getting a KO victory against. He fought Marcin Prachnio, that he got a submission victory against. And more recently, he got a unanimous decision victory against Tyson Pedro. He seems to be getting more comfortable in the octagon and getting better and better in each of his fights. Despite this guy looking like an absolute freaking Brazilian god, the guy is absolute physical specimen. He's only 26 years old. That's insane. Eventually, I think he does run into somebody that gives him some resistance and maybe takes that O from him, but I do not think it is this version of Anthony Smith. I have nothing but respect for Anthony Smith. He's an absolute veteran of the game. But this guy, I can't get behind him at this point in his career. His 2 most recent wins are Ryan Spann. You guys know how that story went at UFC Vegas 91. Can't trust Ryan Spann. And Jimmy Crute, Devin Clark, these aren't fighters that are at the caliber of Petrino, in my opinion. And he's also been getting starched lately. Let me see his most recent losses. He got knocked out more recently against Roundtree. Lost a decision to Johnny Walker, where I don't know if he was getting delusional from the strikes that Walker was landing, but Walker was attacking his family. I know you guys all know what I'm talking about. And Kalaev KO'd him. It's just not looking good for him. I think Anthony Smith is way, way past his due date. I know he's been talking like he's afraid of retiring. I don't know what it is. I think it'll be better for him. I don't think he needs to accrue any more damage. Regardless, I don't think he finds much success here. Petrino for the KO victory. All right, and in this fight, like I said, I kind of spent a lot of time breaking down the prelims and not so much the main card, because there's some heavy favorites on this card. Regardless, this one is tough for me. I'm rooting for Jose Aldo. I just don't think he's going to be able to get this done. Jonathan Martinez is an extremely technical striker. He stays safe. He has that nice high guard, and his kicks are so nasty. Now, these last 2 fights I'm kind of winging. I don't really have notes for them. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's Orthodox Easter this weekend, so I've just been super busy doing that kind of stuff. Regardless, I'm kind of winging this breakdown, but Jonathan Martinez has impressed me. I haven't been impressed with him, and I've picked against him in his fights, but he is slowly growing on me. The guy is a technical menace on the feet. He has incredible leg kicks. Two of his, let me just double check for assurance purposes, but two of his last KO victories have been leg kick TKOs. Most recently against Adrian Yanez and Cub Swanson 3 fights ago. That's impressive. His leg kicks are something else. And Aldo also does have solid leg kicks. So this is going to be the battle of the leg kicks, in my opinion. I think it's going to be a lot of leg kicks being thrown in this fight. He has a win over Said Nurmagomedov, which is impressive. Yeah, I just think at this point in Jose Aldo's career, as we know, I think we know the story behind Aldo. He retired 2 years ago. He's been boxing, though, so he has still had some combat experience and stuff like that in the past 2 years, but he hasn't fought an MMA fight in 2 years. He was fully retired, and now I don't know if it's because they needed some name value for this Brazil card. I don't know what it is, but he's coming out of retirement, 37 years old now. I don't want to say he's washed because I still think he has some good fighting ability. He's the featherweight GOAT, for God's sakes. I just don't know if he's going to have much of an answer for Martinez. That boxing is going to help him. He's kind of adapted more of a boxing style later on in his career. I think it was due to a hip injury from what I was reading up before these breakdowns. But I think Jonathan Martinez is going to stay safe. I think he's going to pick apart Aldo. I don't think Aldo's going to be used to after 2 years off of MMA, I don't think he's going to be used to those leg kicks. It's a shame because I'm really rooting for Jose, and I really, really do want to see him win, and I want to pick him for this fight, but I've been sleeping on Jonathan Martinez for too long. I think he's going to out-technique Aldo, the absolute legend, on the other side. I know this isn't much of a breakdown. Like I said, I'm kind of winging these ones, but give me Martinez to beat Jose Aldo. I'm not going to say by finish, but by a unanimous decision victory. Now we move on to the main event of the evening. I don't have much of a breakdown for this fight either, guys. I know you guys can hate on me all you want, but I'm picking Steve Erceg to take the belt in Brazil and start a freaking riot in Rio de Janeiro. The reason for that is I just haven't been. I know Alessandro Pantoja is 27-5. The guy's never been finished in his 5 career losses, but like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm a hater or what it is, but I just haven't been too impressed with him. The Brandon Royval fight, solid win. I'll give him that. Brandon Royval is 16-7 in his career, though. So, like, Brandon Royval, like, how special is he really? I'm actually a big fan of Royval, so I'm not trying to shit on him, but he did slow down in that fight. Royval turned it up in the 5th round. Wasn't enough, but Alessandro Pantoja has shown that he's so weird because he's shown to have cardio issues, and he seems to slow down, but he just keeps going. I don't know where he finds it. But he just keeps going and going and going. That Moreno fight, most recently, to actually get the belt, that was a split decision win. I don't think he deserved that win. All right? Initially watching that fight, I think Moreno won that fight. Regardless, it's okay. It's okay. He won it. That's fine. The fight before that, submitted Alex Perez. That version of Alex Perez, nothing special. The Alex Perez we saw last weekend, that's something special. Before that, Brandon Royval again ended up submitting him. Okay? Before that, defeated Manel Kape. I don't know what Manel Kape's been doing. This guy's pulling out of every single fight. Regardless, his 2 most recent losses, Askar Askarov, Davison Figueiredo, former champion. And then, before that, it was 2018 against Dustin Ortiz. But he is on a 5-fight win streak. I know the guy's got the grappling chops. He has 10 submission victories in his career. But Steve Erceg is going to be able to compete on the mat. He's got 6 submissions of his own. He's a grappler. He only has 2 KO victories. One recently coming against Matt Schnell back in March, where I had him winning, and he absolutely starched him. Now, I'm not going to give him too high of a praise in that. Everybody knocks out Matt Schnell. But he came in on short notice for his UFC debut against David Dvorak, a solid top 10 fighter at the time. I don't think Dvorak has even fought since then. Yeah, he hasn't even fought since then. That was back in June of last year. But he came in as a big underdog on short notice and just worked Dvorak for 15 minutes. He also went up against Alessandro Costa, who we broke down earlier on this card, back in November of last year. And although Costa landed heavily in that fight, Erceg won that unanimously, no doubt. He actually put Costa on his ass in that matchup as well. And then, more recently, as we already said, he starched Matt Schnell in that second round. But not before Matt Schnell landed heavily. And that's one thing I have a problem with Steve Erceg. He is so hittable. The guy gets in firefights, which is awesome. And at flyweight, it's really fun because these guys can throw absolute heat at each other and probably just stand there because they're 125 pounds. Regardless, Steve Erceg, super hittable, but I don't think Alessandro Pantoja has that one hitter quitter power, as they say. I don't think one punch is going to starch Steve Erceg. I don't think Pantoja has that in him. I think Steve Erceg's boxing is much better than that of Pantoja. I think he's going to be able to keep his range. I think Erceg is going to find a lot of success on the feet. All he has to do is defend those takedowns and not spend too much time on the mat, which Pantoja seems to be able to do to every single person that he fights. But I think Erceg's jiu-jitsu is going to be able to hang with Pantoja. He's probably not better than Pantoja on the mat, but I think he does have the grappling chops to compete on the mat, to stay safe, hopefully enough to not remain on the ground too much in a disadvantageous position. I think on the feet, Erceg is going to be the much better fighter. The only thing I have a beef with, like I said, is that he's hittable. But I don't think Pantoja has that one shot to put him away. I think Erceg is going to have the better striking exchanges. A big question mark is Steve Erceg's cardio. Is Steve Erceg going to be able to fight a 5-round fight if necessary? I'm looking through his fights here. I don't think he's ever seen a 5-round fight. I don't think he has. But just because we haven't seen it doesn't mean he doesn't have it. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to bank on the fact that this guy has better moments that Erceg has better moments on the feet, lands those bigger shots that are going to sway the judges. I think he's going to be able to be competent enough to find some success on the mat. If not success, at least keep himself safe enough not to get submitted, have the ability to get back onto his feet. And I hope to God this guy has good cardio, but I'm going with Steve Erceg to get the upset. That is my breakdown. Now, sorry for these sloppy breakdowns for the main event or for the main card, but there was a lot of heavy favorites. I didn't think there was much for me to explain. I will get better at this whole breaking down thing, guys. I really appreciate you guys checking out my videos. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more UFC content. Support the channel and drop your comments. I want to hear your guys' perspective on these matchups. Whether you agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. Let me know your thoughts. I will see you guys in the recap video. I did promise that I was going to drop post weigh-in videos if there was anything different that I saw. So tomorrow, or I guess it'll be today, you guys are going to see this video on Friday. But after the weigh-ins, if there's a significant change in something that I see, I will drop a video. If not, that means I didn't change any of my selections for this UFC 301 card. And I will see you guys in the recap video. Have a fantastic night.